I came awake to find I was lying on a soft, clean pillow. Moving my arms, I felt the smooth, soft linen sensation of clean sheets. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept in a real bed. It was morning, and the bedroom I found myself in was lit with the soft sunlight through the pleated ivory window shades. I blinked my eyes fully open and recognized where I was. It was my bedroom in my home, my original home on the acreage in the middle of the Great Plains of North America. I stretched and took a deep breath. Aside from the minor aches and pains which were normal for a man in his seventh decade, I felt pretty good. Much better than when I had been living in a tent just a day or... I suddenly realized that I had no idea how long ago that had been. I could have spent years in biosuspension for all I knew. I soon noticed that I was clean. My skin felt tingly and freshly scrubbed. I ran my fingers through my hair and beard. Both were still long, but they had clearly been given a wash and trim. I noticed the nails on my fingers had been trimmed and my hands were clean. I lifted the bedding and saw that my body was unclothed. No sign of IVs or other medical devices either, which was nice. It had been years since I had been able to sleep in the nude, and it felt wonderful. I had grown used to wearing the long underwear at all times, not just to stay warm, but in case I needed to move quickly in the night. My genealogy amulet was still hanging on its light alloy chain around my neck. I lifted it so I could focus on it and saw that it had also been cleaned and polished. I was relieved to find that it had not been taken from me or altered. I lay still for a moment, just listening. The house was silent. Either I was alone or else everyone was being very quiet. I was able to hear the wind blowing outside, which was normal for the high prairie location of my acreage. My full bladder finally elevated its status to the top of the list, and I got up to use the toilet. When I had finished, I stood in front of the large mirror inspecting myself. Who was this old guy staring back at me? Although I had been scrubbed clean and my hair and beard neatened, the body I saw in front of me still looked tired and worn out. My skin was leathery and was covered with both old and newer scars, although they were mostly minor and long since healed. A new toothbrush and mint toothpaste were waiting where I usually stored such items. So I brushed my teeth. It felt wonderful to use a regular toothbrush instead of my finger or a soft stick. The auto flosser felt even better. I thought about taking a shower right then, but decided to inspect the house first and maybe find something to eat to break my fast. Besides, I had gotten used to going for weeks between bathing. Skipping a shower this morning would not bother me in the slightest. Back in my room, I found the wardrobe was filled with garments of the type I'd normally worn every day. I dressed in clean underwear, socks, denim-like pants, and a long-sleeved t-shirt. I spent a moment marveling at the feeling of the new and clean clothing. I looked around and did not see my old worn utility clothing or my fur-lined hide cape. I wondered what had happened to them. I stopped in the living room on my way to the kitchen. It was much as I recalled from the last time I had been here. I looked at the images of my family hanging on the walls. So many new young faces. Some of the older members looked different, having changed shells. On another wall, there was a large portrait that showed my entire clan as if we had all posed together. It must have been created using the machine's fakery, as I was never physically with them all at the same time. In fact, I was pretty sure that at least a quarter of them I had never met in person. The shelf on the far wall held the same trinkets and momentous as it did from the last time I had been here. I tried to remember how long ago that had been. More than 20 or 30 years at least. I had stopped coming here as often as time marched on. The visits had started to slow down when the acreage had begun to be visited by historically minded new humans on their discovery tours and pilgrimages. I began to avoid my old home partially because I wanted to respect their right to play tourist and because their visits had made the place feel less like mine. I had also had some pretty sweet aircraft over the years, most of which had more than all the comforts of home. With almost the whole world now a natural paradise, why live in a fixed place when you can set down anywhere the view is good? I traveled, shacked up, visited offspring, boated, you name it. Time passed quickly. I had also built other homes around the planet, some of which I missed more than others. Still, I was happy to see the old house well kept and clean. There was no dust or mildew, so someone or something had been keeping up with the chores. I saw out the front window that it looked to be a nice, partly cloudy, typical fall day. There was no snow on the ground yet, and it would be a month or two before the weather was consistently cold enough for anything white to stick around. I hadn't smelled anything coming from the kitchen when I had awoken, so I guess breakfast was up to me. Entering the kitchen, I found a note on the table. John, it was decided that it would be best to allow you to wake in solitude. No humans or autonomous presences are here at your acreage at this time. As you may suspect, you were bathed and medically treated while you were unconscious. Aside from a thorough cleaning and the removal of a few minor parasites, nothing major was done. Your blood chemistry was balanced to bring it closer to your normal levels, which should improve your emotional state. You were also given a general dose of vitamins and a temporary intoxicant inhibitor. No mental adjustments were performed, and your implant has been left mostly disabled, as you had previously required. There are 2 humans residing at the old field base to the west. When and if you are ready, they would like to speak with you. In the meantime, rest and recuperate. If you have any needs, simply ask. I frowned at what I had just read. I guess I could live with what they had done. I was a bit surprised that I had not found Omu here waiting for me to awake. The AI must fear that I would react harshly. I was not exactly sure how I would have reacted. I could still feel the emotions and shock of the recent events of, well, I was not sure when the tragedy in Mongolia had happened. I assumed it was a day or 2 ago, but who knows how long I was unconscious. Air transport from Mongolia to South Dakota could take as little as an hour or most of the day, depending upon the urgency required and the type of air or spacecraft used. I had not remained awake long enough to see the aircraft which had come for me, so I had no way of knowing how fast it had brought me here. What day is it? I spoke to the air. It is 7:45 a.m., Friday, October 4th, 3112, a neutral-sounding automated voice said. The words had come from the refrigerator, which was just an appliance. Naomi was still adhering to my mandate. Friday, October 4th. Let's see. I had been sedated Wednesday morning before being brought here. I had been kept asleep all day yesterday while they poked, prodded, bathed, and groomed me. It bothered me that I had been kept under for a full day and a half, but there was not much I could do about that now. I had practically begged the AI to bring me here after all. I guess I could not blame it for seeing to my medical and cleanliness needs while it had the chance. Inside the refrigerator, I found enough food for a week's worth of meals. Some of the items were in the generic containers with minimal labeling, which meant they had been locally replicated. Others appeared to have the type of fancy labeling or packaging that meant they had been grown or prepared in the old-fashioned way by actual human farmers and chefs. In this new era, some humans had rediscovered the love and satisfaction of cooking and farming. Now there was a small but thriving market for specialty foodstuffs. I grabbed a bottle of sauce on the rack and inspected its label. Piper's Pickled Pepper Sauce, I muttered. The picture below the label had a small fireball coming out of a turtle's mouth. Why there was a turtle on the logo, I had no idea. Still, I was curious and put the bottle with the other ingredients and items I was assembling. I added a loaf of unsliced bread. Apparently humanity still had things to relearn. 2 eggs and a few strips of what I thought was genuine hickory smoked bacon. I made myself a breakfast of toast with bacon and eggs, spicy style. I had to admit that Piper's hot sauce was good. It lacked the kick of Tabasco, but had a much better flavor. After I finished, I sat in the quiet, familiar house and sipped my coffee. I felt almost human again. Later in the morning, I slipped on an old favorite jacket, probably a copy, and a new pair of work boots which I found in the hall closet. Outside, I began to explore my old acreage. As I had suspected when I had looked out the window, I found that the yard had been immaculately maintained. Being fall, the trees had just begun to drop their colorful leaves, but the grass was still green and had been recently cut. The lack of leaves on the ground indicated that who or whatever had done the yard work had also collected and reduced the leaf litter as well. There was a good possibility that the replicated portions of my breakfast had been created using the leaf biomatter. The front porch was as I had last remembered it. There was only the one rocker Nassau, as the others had been removed almost a century ago. Since this place now existed primarily for historical tourism, the solitary porch chair had been retained to make the place seem more like it was when I had lived here before the apocalypse of 2021. At least they had not gone so far as to have a metal bucket of empty beer bottles next to the chair, as had been common back then. I strolled down the smooth, gravel-covered drive, heading towards the paved road which fronted the acreage. The trees along each side of the drive were fully mature, except for the occasional younger replacement saplings. The colors of their leaves were amazing. The red maples were a sharp contrast to the evergreens and the tan of the bur oaks. I realized suddenly that my restored acreage had been here for a century and a half. That meant that the first trees had long since reached full maturity, and replacements had been needed. It also occurred to me that this recreation was now almost twice as old as my original acreage had been back when the reset had destroyed it. I shook my head, amazed. At the end of the gravel driveway, I checked my mailbox and found it empty. I smiled when I recalled that over a century ago, when I had spent much more time here and had been on better terms with the AI, I had often found random mail in the box. The AI would produce automobile extended warranty notices or other junk mail, and leave it for my amusement. Once I had found a yard work bill which had overdue charges compiling for over 7 decades. It was empty today, though, much like me, I noted ironically. I turned from the mailbox and looked slowly around. The paved road leading to the east eventually looped around and became a winding trail that ended at my small lake cabin located a mile north of my current location. The trail route itself was about 2 miles long as it meandered and was a great path for jogging or biking. I remembered how the kids had loved to ride their floating lev boards on the perfectly maintained pavement. To the south of the frontage road was a mowed grassy ditch. Beyond that, the short, mowed grass abruptly became the natural tall grasses and wildflowers, which dominated the upper prairie. The ring of sentry pylons just beyond the horizon kept the large herds of buffalo away, so this grass was never grazed or cropped properly. The pylons also acted as the last line of deterrent that kept any larger predators far away from the area surrounding my homestead. There was little fear of neo-bears here. A third benefit of the pylons was that they prevented any wildfire danger, so the tall, thick grass was mostly harmless and presented little actual fire risk. I stood for a moment just watching the tall grass wave gently in the light prairie wind. It reminded me of the ocean, which I suddenly realized I missed more than I expected. Maybe a few months on a beach at heels in the sand should be my next plan. I saw a flicker of movement in the distance, probably a jackrabbit or fox. Heading west from my drive was a more recently constructed paved road. This one headed over the hill and onto the location of the mostly underground facility which had replaced Pickett's old bunker. The replacement facility was only partially above ground and was much larger than Pickett's farm had once been. Good old Pickett. May he rest in hell. He had been my neighbor before the reset, but had also been an agent of our enemy, the assemblage. Back to the field base. Its current function was as a local base for various bits of automation which maintained the ecology of the area. There was also an aircraft landing area and a visitor's lodge where new humans could stay when they took historical pilgrimage tours to my home. I wondered if any tourist had had to be sent away when I asked that I be brought here a day ago. Oh well, this was my home first. They could wait. Chances are I'd be leaving soon again anyway. I recalled from the note I'd found in the kitchen that there were 2 people at the base lodge waiting to speak with me. Not today, I muttered to myself as I turned back to continue inspecting my acreage. From the road, the house looked much like it did when I had lived here over 1,000 years ago. The garage off to the side was the same. The front porch, the picket fences, and the flower gardens, although now with far fewer weeds, were mostly the same. I shifted my gaze to the far back corner of my property. There sat the only major change from the original acreage. It was a tall, red-painted Gothic-style barn. This was a recreation of the beautiful old, curved-roof barn that once stood on Pickett's neighboring acreage. That wonderful barn had collapsed and burned the night of the attack when Pickett had launched his small escape rocket out of it. To pay homage to its style and craftsmanship, I had had the AI reconstruct it, but this time within the bounds of my old acreage. The tall, arched roof that made up most of the barn held a huge, cavernous, open hay mount that I had converted to an exercise and play area when I had lived here with my children and grandchildren. The barn's more intimate lower level had once had stalls that housed a few Neo horses and ponies. Two of my daughters had kept Neo horses in the barn, and later I had kept a few ponies for the grandchildren. I doubted there were any living animals still housed in the barn at this time, but I had better go take a look. As I walked past my house and back towards the barn, I saw that its red paint looked streaked and weathered. I smiled as this was exactly as intended. The AI had gone to great lengths to print the exterior coloring as weathered. It was actually a very robust coating that would last a lot longer than I'd probably be around to admire it. The rest of the barn looked old and worn, but this was just more fakery as those parts were also in perfect condition. The sashes with their now unbreakable composite crystalline panes were intact. The roof had its tarnished, galvanized-looking cupola and rusty metal rooster weather vane. I smiled as the vane rotated in the breeze, complete with an authentic squeak. That it had squeaked exactly like that for almost a century and a half was a testament to the AI's engineering and maintenance skills. I entered the barn through the small side door and stood listening for sound or movement. It was quiet, but I did detect movement. I smiled as it proved to be a young barn cat which jumped down from a high perch and ran off towards the back. I was sure the AI could have kept the place rodent-free, but having real cats help do the job appealed to the pilgrims, I was sure. I admit that I also liked the cats being here. They were normally pretty wild, but sometimes one would be friendly and brave enough to approach the rare human visitor. The rest of the barn's lower level was filled with an assortment of tools, vehicles, and other items from pre-apocalypse times and from the various later eras of the restored acreage's occupancy. These items were arranged in the neat rows more suited to a museum exhibit than a working barn. Much of it was new to me and had not been here the last time I had visited. I smiled when I saw a recreation of the electric cart mules, like the ones I had used when I had awakened in the damaged underground bunker next door. The mule on exhibit also had the crane arm attachment installed. On the wall behind the display was a holographic projection showing the mule arm, a small aerial drone, and a mobile unit as they treated the injured likeness of a younger version of me. The scene recreated an accident that had occurred early in the 26th century, back when I had been the only human awake on the planet. I had fallen and suffered a severe head injury. The local AI had used all of its limited equipment to save my life. I felt a tightness in my stomach as I remembered living through the accident. I had been very lucky to survive. Next to the old-style mule was a newer buggy model. This vehicle was more like the recreational utility vehicles from my old era. It was faster and had decent off-road capabilities along with two comfortable human seats. I saw that the power source on the display buggy was a standard ESU. That meant I could drive the mule for a week and cover a serious distance of terrain if I wanted. I remembered having a lot of fun in one of these when I had raised my kids here. We had used them so much that there had been worn trails for miles around the acreage. Those trails would probably be overgrown by now. At the end of the display rows in the larger end bay of the barn sat an old aircraft. I smiled when I recognized Flipper. This had been the aircraft that the master AI had sent all the way from its asteroid base to here. I had used it to relocate myself from the damaged South Dakota field base to the undamaged and active Tennessee field base. On a whim, I approached the side door to the cockpit and hit the entry detente. The door opened smoothly, and the aircraft's interior lights came on. It looked identical to the old aircraft I had used 6 centuries ago, but had to be a newer copy. I took my seat in the cockpit, and the instrument display activated, causing data to be projected on the heads-up portion of the canopy. Every operating part, flap, and motor displayed green, and the ESU energy cell levels read full. This bird was ready to fly. A flashing display appeared asking if I wanted the barn's large end doors open. I selected yes, and the large sliding doors began opening smoothly, and the aircraft began moving forward. I leaned forward and looked out of the canopy towards the landing skids below and saw that Flipper was resting on a large, low platform that was apparently mobile. That platform was now slowly conveying the aircraft out of the confined lower level of the barn. It looked like I would be going for a ride. Once the aircraft was clear of the barn, its wings and tail began unfolding into their flight positions. It took a few minutes, but eventually The platform came to a stop about 100 feet away from the barn. The three lift fans spooled up and swiveled as I tested the controls. Soon the aircraft was ready to fly. I hit the triggers, which auto-spooled the three tilting rotor fans up to full takeoff speed. The craft began to vibrate a bit. I was a bit nervous. It had been decades since I had manually flown anything like this. I suspected the AI would watch over my flight, but I was not completely sure with my mandate still active. I felt I could still do this and cinched up the tethers which held me into the pilot's seat. When I was secure and breathing slower, I toggled the thumb control on the yoke which controlled vertical movement. The spinning fan blades changed pitch and began to generate lift. With a howl, we slowly started to rise. Dust and grass blew out and away from the aircraft from our downblast as we began to climb. At 100 feet, I swiveled the fans in their mounts to get us moving forward. Soon we were flying along at well over 100 miles per hour and a few hundred feet above the prairie. I had forgotten how much fun this could be as I banked the aircraft around to the west. Within seconds, I was overflying the nearby field base. I saw two humans walking outside the half-underground visitors' dormitory. They stopped and just stared as I flew by. I waggled Flipper's wings, and I saw in the rear display that they were waving in reply. I continued flying off to the southwest, gaining altitude as I went. As I took the aircraft above 2,000 feet, a synthetic voice spoke up. "This is Global Air Traffic Control. Be advised that all nearby automated air traffic will remain above 32,800 feet. Also, no aircraft under VFR manual control is currently airborne within the operational range of your craft. You are free to maneuver and navigate as you see fit as long as you remain below 28,000 feet. I looked up to confirm what Aeolus AI, the ATC of our planet, had just told me, and sure enough, high in the sky, I spotted almost a dozen faint contrails. These were from automated cargo aircraft crisscrossing the skies at a much higher altitude. I agreed with the recommendation to stay well below them. Soon, I leveled off Flipper at around 20,000 feet. I recalled something about Aeolus's message and snorted. The ATC presence had relayed the altitude recommendations to me in the old-style measurement units. Naomi must have snitched to the other AIs a while back. I was probably the only person on the planet who was currently using archaic units. It suddenly dawned on me that Flipper's data projections were also showing feet and not meters. The damn AI had reset the heads-up display in deference to my stubborn decision to use the old units when we parted ways years ago. I had to admit, it was going out of its way to deal with the irrational human who had gone rogue. 50 miles southwest of my acreage, as I was banking Flipper around to head back, I spotted something odd off towards the southern horizon. I changed course slightly to head more in that direction to see what it was. After flying onward another dozen miles, I finally remembered. It was the site of one of the fake arcologies we were constructing all across the planet. They were a key part of our deception plan to mislead any early assemblage scouts who might arrive ahead of their arc. If they somehow managed to do a clandestine flyby of Sol system without our detecting them, we wanted them to think that the master AI was still in control and working hard to ready the Earth for Ark's arrival. We were less worried about a direct attack from any scouts as we were that they would somehow send a warning back to the assemblage. Hence the deception gambit. The arcology portion of the deception effort was to appear to have constructed enough dwellings to handle their 11 billion plus membership, which they planned to download onto the Earth as they passed by. We did not need that much actual housing for humanity, so to spare resources, the majority of the arcologies we were building were fakes. They were just crude shells filled with empty chambers or sometimes used as local storage. To help simulate a real and active structure, the giant fakes had moving heat sources, random radio and photon emissions, and even fake local land and air traffic, all to make them appear fully functional, at least from a cursory inspection. Along with the fake arcologies, we were building additional power production facilities, manufactories, data processing centers, and various bits of transportation infrastructure. These were not just for looks, though, as we intended to use them for ourselves and for the defense of our solar system. The extra data centers were needed for the simulated environment we were preparing to fool any early arriving assemblage digital mind data agents. So far, none had arrived, but the likelihood grew every year. As I looked around at the perfectly clear skies without any signs of pollution or smog, I was proud that despite the Earth having undergone enormous construction efforts for the past century and a half, we had done so without spoiling the planet. I gradually descended as I approached the construction site. 15 minutes later, I was close enough to see details. The massive shell of the building loomed ahead like a mountain. Its appearance was that of a flat-top pyramid at least 1,000 feet to a side and almost 2,000 feet tall. The sides were pierced with many openings, mostly windows, but there were also intake or exhaust ducts. Some projected out from the surface, likely viewing balconies or terraces. The huge building reminded me in many ways of the big main building in that old science fiction film, Blade Runner. I was glad it was sited in a clear, bright, sunny prairie landscape instead of the gloomy, polluted industrial wasteland as it had been in the film. I continued circling and observing the massive construction activity going on below. There were enormous mobile cranes and manipulator arms that shifted large wall panels and other supports. The equipment was many times larger than the biggest construction cranes of my youth and was also working much faster. Just then, the communication system came alive. Aircraft flipper, traffic advisory to your east. Please maintain 1/2 mile separation from the descending cargo aircraft. Wake turbulence warning. I looked off in the direction Iolaus had indicated and spotted the huge aircraft that was just beginning its glide down towards the construction site's landing area. Keeping my distance beyond the minimums I had been given, I guided Flipper to parallel the approaching freighter and set the autopilot so I could watch it land. The aircraft resembled a huge fat cigar, at least 200 feet long. Its wings were large and formed a hollow diamond-shaped planform. Its forward-affixed wings were long and swept back, while the equally long rear-affixed wings swept forward. They met and were joined at their outer tips, thus forming the diamond shape. All 4 wing surfaces were studded with large, tilting electrothermal fan turbine engines. These were currently at full power and tilted mostly downward as the lumbering craft slowly settled down into the hard surface landing field. Now that the beast was down, I moved Flipper in closer and set her to orbit the area slowly. As I continued to observe the landing area, busy-looking mobile units dragging large hoses approached the aircraft. These were attached to fittings on the hull and the plane's fuselage. At first, I thought that the hoses were for refueling the aircraft before I remembered that electrothermal jets did not require fuel. The hoses were actually there to unload the cargo. It all came back to me. The cargo was likely the liquid binding chemicals used to glue the local earth and rock into the large wall and roof panels used in the fake Arcology's construction. These panels were stacked and attached, using a similar glue, into the massive building that I was currently flying around. I was impressed that even though the building required an enormous quantity of local rock and gravel for its construction, there were few signs of excavation. All that was visible was a few small shafts leading underground, which were disgorging automated carts full of gravel. The shafts led to underground continuous automated mining machines, which extended around the site for miles. I shook my head at all the construction happening and took Flipper higher while setting course for my home. Noon was approaching as I neared the area of my compound. Before I landed to make lunch, I detoured Flipper around to the north of the house's location to where my small lake and fishing cabin was situated. A quick, low pass showed the cabin was just as I had remembered it. The stone path leading from it to the small stone jetty extending out into the lake put me in the mood to do a bit of fishing. I'd have to drive over and check it out soon. I flew across the mile-long lake, heading towards its western end. The low-flying aircraft startled a flock of geese resting on the lake, and they took to the air. They were likely in the middle of their migration south for the winter. I took Flipper a bit higher before realizing that I was already past the geese and didn't have to worry about bird strikes. At the western end of the lake, I saw something unexpected. It was a man. He was wading in the shallows fishing with some sort of wooden spear. He looked up as I approached, and I saw that he was dressed in what looked like leather buckskins. He resembled a traditional Sioux Indian warrior from a time over 100 years before I was born. "What the hell?" He waved as I flew over. I waggled my wings in return. I wondered what he was doing there and why was he running around in that old-time getup. Also, why was he using my lake without my permission? As I banked Flipper back around to the south, I saw what must have been his camp off in the distance, about a mile beyond the lake's western edge. I reversed the bank to overfly the camp to take a look. Taking Flipper lower, I overflew the camp and could see signs of visible activity. There were more people at the camp. What I saw was confusing. The camp was composed of a half-dozen teepee-like structures. Were there that many people camping here? It must have been some sort of historical reenactment group, or maybe it was an entertainment production set. Next to the teepees, I saw a few human figures moving about. I also spotted a pair of Neo horses grazing in the grass, along with half a dozen larger quadruped mobile units. The machines were probably standing sentry watch on the horses or just idling. Flipper was now nearly overhead, and I saw the human figures stand still and remain motionless. I realized suddenly that they all were androids. Unlike my old companion android, these were much taller and thinner. They remained motionless even after I waggled my wings, which was odd. It looked like the man at the lake was the only living person in the camp. I headed back towards my compound. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I wanted to ask the AI for an explanation. But I was still too stubborn to do that, so maybe tomorrow I could just drive the buggy mule over and investigate the strange camp myself. I soon had Flipper back on the ground and safely stored back in its parking spot in the barn. My empty, growling stomach had me hustling into the house to rustle up some lunch.